sort of late season 2025 hurricane forecast. Sort of see if this hurricane season can really salvage itself. This is all the storms currently going on. You can see the Western Pacific very active. We have Category 4 Typhoon Roxa and Category 4 Typhoon Niorguri. I can't pronounce that. But if we go back here to the Atlantic, we do have Tropical Storm Gabrielle. Currently at 55 knot winds and a minimum pressure of 996 millibars. But if we take a look here at the Atlantic so far, the numbers have been less than impressive, so to speak. 7 named storms is less than the average of 10 named storms by this time. 1 hurricane, less than the average of 4, and 1 major hurricane, less than the average of 2. Where we're really lacking, however, is ACE, and you can see it better down here. 42 ACE compared to the average of 68.44. And this climatology actually isn't even correct. It should be higher because this is 1951 to 2024. So if you're doing 30 year, which is what most things do, it's actually even more below average. But even this is still, even with this, it's still below average by quite a bit, and you can see almost no activity from when Aaron developed. This is Aaron here. He shot up, and then we've had a couple of tropical storms since then. Tropical Storm Ferdinand, which was weak, and then Gabrielle, which should strengthen, but right now it's pretty weak. So almost all of the ace has come from Aaron. 9 ace outside of it. So a very weak hurricane season to start. Now, in terms of what's going on with Gabrielle, you can see that most models have a Category 2. Some do flirt with the idea of Category 3, but only one gets it there late, and one appears to maybe sneak into Category 3, but it's a very weak Category 3. The consensus seems to be Category 2. Now, they could be underdoing rapid intensification. That wouldn't be, a total shock. And it could be a Category 3, but it doesn't look like a sure shot, and the NHC certainly doesn't buy it being a major hurricane. But you can see with the cones, they generally put it into Category 2, and then it quickly drops off into Category 1, and then most eventually bring it into Tropical Storm, though some do hang it around in hurricane status a bit longer, which would contribute more ACE, to the season total. But it doesn't look, it doesn't look like it'll be major. If we look at tropical cyclone heat potential, it is in sort of positive anomalies, and it should continue to track through positive anomalies. Look at our sea surface temperatures, also positive, and even more positive to the north. So it's going to continue to be in a favorable environment in terms of water, at least from where water temperatures are concerned. So that will certainly aid in its development. Now, if we look here at a bigger image of its forecast cone, you can see pretty strong confidence it will recurve. It also will not directly hit Bermuda, although Bermuda could still feel the impacts of it. Recurve much further away from the coast than Aaron recurved, I should say. And it's not really a threat to the mainland U.S. and the hurricane season in terms of continental U.S. impacts have been almost zero. Tropical Storm Chantal did, I believe, landfall in South Carolina, although it might have been North Carolina, one of the Carolinas. But in terms of either strong tropical storms or hurricanes, it really has not been much. And the Gulf and Caribbean could wake up in October, but climatology favors it less and less every day in terms of U.S. impacts. So that's what the cone looks like for for Gabrielle, you'll notice no M, so NHC is not forecasting a major. If you look at our sort of satellite loop, convection has been pretty robust here with Gabrielle. There's no I because it's not strong enough. But this looks certainly much better than it did, I think, about 2 or 3 days ago when they first got named and it looked terrible. It looks much better now. It's in warm waters. I believe it has low wind shear. I'd imagine it does have low wind shear, but yeah. So Gabrielle, it looks pretty good for a tropical storm, and it should continue to intensify. So that's Gabrielle. But if we look here, sort of at what could happen beyond Gabrielle, the wind shear in the Gulf looks strong, so I don't think anything's going to try and develop there. There's not really a signal for anything to develop there, but wind shear looks really strong there. If we go out here to, this is the middle of next week, Thursday. Wind shear strong across the MDR, but you can see the Gulf and Caribbean starting to see a reduction of wind shear. Again, not a huge developed signal there, but you can see shear in the Caribbean especially tries to remain low, so you could see something try and spin up there. Shear tries to return to the northern Gulf too. So based on this model, the Caribbean could be something to watch. The MDR looks like it has near normal shear. A lot of the time past Saturday, and so nothing crazy favorable in the MDR. Nothing crazy unfavorable either. It's near normal, but some reduction in shear across the Caribbean and Western MDR. That's the EPS model. If you go over here to the GEFS model, what's it predicting? And I don't want that. I want the 12Z. Here at the 12Z model, same thing, right? A lot of shear in the Gulf. That goes away by the middle of next week, but it quickly returns and then goes away again. So, that's interesting. But like the European, it tries to keep shear weak in the Western MDR/Caribbean. So that could be a interesting spot. We could see some storms via the Central American gyre, or if waves can survive, they're very from Africa, they could start encountering a more favorable environment here. So that's something interesting to note. Of course, you do have generally higher wind shear in the northern Gulf, especially, which could keep things quiet near the U.S. coast. So that's not a guarantee. And then shear starts low in the southern Gulf. You can see that on the GEFS model. If you look here at our PWAT anomalies, generally moister than normal across most of the Atlantic, which could be a good signal for development, but doesn't really have to be. It just means that you're not having any big sort of Saharan air layer outbreaks or something along those lines. Go back here to the EPS model and see here a similar story on the PWAT. Generally higher than normal PWAT, although you do see this sort of what looks to me like probably a Saharan air layer outbreak across the Atlantic that could squash development as it moves through. But in general, it does look like we will have enhanced PWAT, especially across the Gulf and Caribbean. In terms of MSMLP, low MSMLP across the Gulf, that could be concerning, but you do have your pretty high wind shear there. So, high wind shear, low MSLP, some conflicting signals for the Gulf, but I don't see any signs that point to a wild amount of development from the ensembles, and I don't want to use the operationals. I will say that the European AI model, I believe, did have another That's Gabrielle, and it does have another storm, sort of taking a very similar track to Gabrielle. I don't like using operationals, but it is worth noting that the AI has this, but the physics models, the physics models do have this too, and that's interesting. No, I don't want that. If you take a look back here, alright, this doesn't want to load, whatever. Anyway, so I believe the European model actually didn't have this before the 12Z run. Let's see if the 0Z wants to load. Yeah, I didn't have it, and now it's on board, which is interesting. But I would be wary of using operationals this far out. But if you go back here to the ensembles, um, you know, and if you look here, wind shear is pretty elevated across the path that it takes, across the coast of the southeast. So it would run into a sheared environment if the EPS is to be believed. So, either way, it doesn't look as though we're going to be an insanely favorable pattern to end September. And that's our sort of wind shear forecast. If we look here at our velocity potential forecast, this is our MJO signal. You can see that this low pass signal has been in the Indian Ocean / maritime continent. That's basically our La Nina showing up on the model. If you look at our MJO Kelvin wave stuff, I'm not particularly impressed by this model. This model would generally support threats in the Gulf and Caribbean. It probably wouldn't support MDR threats. There's simply too much upward motion in the Pacific. You can see the bulk of the upward motion is centered in the Pacific. And, you have a lot of sinking air over Africa. In the 4th to the 10th. On the 11th to the 17th, it does start to get a bit better. You still have a little too much upward motion in the Eastern Pacific for my liking for the MDR. And also climatology is starting to become a problem after mid-October. Now, I will say that as it pertains to the MDR, this doesn't look good, but as it pertains to the Gulf and Caribbean, this is actually a pretty good look. This suggests the MJO going into phase 8 or 1, which isn't great for the Atlantic, but it's pretty good for the Gulf. And this is where you get most severe Central American gyre storms. This is where you get, storms that form over the Gulf and Caribbean. And by 11th to the 17th, you also have a force of upward motion over Africa and the Indian Ocean, which could produce enhanced waves off Africa. So this is a pretty favorable look, but before that, it also does not look too impressive to me. You can see subsidence over the Atlantic, and most of your upward motion is centered in the Western Pacific, not in the Indian Ocean. If you had subsidence over the Atlantic and upward motion in the Indian Ocean, it would be a more favorable pattern. It would be a favorable pattern. That is a favorable pattern, but you don't. So yeah. In terms of what the other models are showing, this is the GEFS model. This is a Hove molar. It's not a map, but you can see a sort of similar idea, probably even worse for the MDR though, because you have legit subsidence over Africa / the Indian Ocean, but you can see some hints of rising air try to enter Africa. So as it pertains to the MDR, this would not in fact be a very favorable outcome. But with this upward motion over the Gulf and Caribbean, again, it could produce some storms out of Central American gyre. You also have sinking air over the Pacific. That's La Nina-like. The global wind state looks very La Nina-like in terms of negative atmospheric angular momentum. So that's a positive sign for hurricanes. And this is very similar to CFS in the fact that it would favor the Central American gyre and probably not favor the MDR because your bulk of the upward motion is focused in the Gulf and the Eastern Pacific, not so much in the Atlantic. You do have some in the Atlantic, but you also have sinking air across the Indian Ocean and Africa. Now, if we go here to the European model, the European model is, or the European AI model, I should say, is showing is pretty much totally different. It shows upward motion over the Indian Ocean and parts of Africa, and generally sinking motion across the Atlantic, some weak upward motion uh, over the Gulf, but much weaker than what the JFS and the CFS were showing. This would favor more waves coming off Africa. This would favor possibly a more active end to the MDR season. The MDR season obviously doesn't end until like November 30th, but the MDR usually quiets down quite a bit as we get through October. So this could actually extend the MDR season if we continue to get this MJO phase 3, phase 4 upward motion, which is when the hurricane season is most active, when the MJOs are in phase 3/4, really phase 4, but 3/4 both active. So that's a good sign if you want to see some MDR hurricanes. Again, sinking is centered over the Pacific. If sinking was back here over the Atlantic, you could argue that's more of a concern. The sinking is in the Pacific. Again, that's La Nina-like. We also saw this on the GFS model. So a very La Nina-like pattern on the European AI model, and negative IOD too. I should add that this is most likely not an MJO signal. It's most likely a low pass signal, negative IOD and La Nina. Now, take a look here at the European model. It's very similar. You do get this sort of suppressive Kelvin wave or suppressive MJO wave. I don't know. It doesn't say what it is, but you get this suppression off Africa. The last few days of September, but it goes away first few days of October, and again you get this sort of low pass signal here. This isn't an MJO wave. It's a La Nina negative IOD low pass signal, and you get another high pass. I mean, it's technically a low pass. High pressure sinking air over the central and eastern Pacific. Again, this is a pretty classic La Nina negative IOD signal. Weak upward motion over the Gulf, but I think your main thing here would be an MDR, more MDR threats. It should be noted, I'm talking about here about how, the MDR could wake up post, I would say, September 29th, but climatology is rapidly falling, and the sort of the window of favorability, I should say, has been pushed back quite a lot now. So it's, I am saying that it could certainly get more favorable after, the 29th, but I wouldn't bank on it. That's what I'll say. In terms of what actual MJO forecasts are, they're projected to stay in COD. You can see a lot of these are in the circle of death. The GFS extended tries to maybe put it into the Western Hemisphere. That's not a strong signal though. The European extended doesn't have a strong signal. CFS again tries to put it in the Western Hemisphere and then maybe into the Indian Ocean, but all of these are weak signals except for the BOEM, which I don't know what it's doing. I never trust the BOEM. The BOEM is terrible. The BOEM is awful. Yeah, no. So MJO and COD, which means we're driven by La Nina negative IOD forcing, which is pretty good for the Atlantic. I mean, if you're going to be driven by a background state forcing, you want it to be La Nina, and maybe positive IOD would be better, but those never, La Nina positive IOD never coincide except maybe once. So the background forcing on the global wind state look favorable. It's just a question of can the Atlantic capitalize, and so far the answer has been no. Could that change? Yes. The CFS and GFS seem to favor a sort of pattern that would favor the Gulf and Caribbean. The AIFS and the EPS seem to favor a more MDR wake up in October. If we look here at potential, this is non-operational GFS, potential tropical systems. This is Gabrielle. Has some other models developing some other, whatever, I don't know what the next name is. Some other name system. Gulf, again, you could get something here, but nothing too strong, and then a very weak MDR signal. This doesn't scream that the Atlantic is going to wake up in the next 10 days. Now, of course, the models could be wrong. Won't put too much stock into this. And a lot of the, the CFS, GFS, EPS, and AIFS are showing conditions that would become more favorable either in the Caribbean or the Gulf after October 1st. And October is still a fairly active month when it comes to hurricanes. But if we look here at the EPS model, this is 240 hours, similar story, maybe even less so. You do get a bit of a stronger signal here for what looks like a wave coming off Africa, West Africa, but almost no signal in the Gulf, and all of them are, I don't even know if that's a tropical storm, that might just be a tropical depression in most of these. This is going to be Gabrielle, sort of recurving in the North Atlantic, but other than this Gabrielle signal, almost nothing, I should say. Interestingly, however, the Google model does want what looks like a Southwest Atlantic threat, potentially threatening the East Coast. This is all Gabrielle. I don't think sort of these low tracks are, so that's a bit stronger of a signal on these. I believe the Google models, but I'm not actually totally sure what this is. And then if you look here at our last model, again, some potentially weak signals for development in the Southwest Atlantic and the Gulf and the MDR, but these signals are all weak. And again, as the days go by, climatology starts to favor us less and less, favor her his and less. Now, in terms of do I think it'll make the comeback, I think that if the Gulf can wake up, if the upward motion goes to the Gulf, I don't think ACE can make a comeback because S favors less ACE because the storms just can't track as long. But you could make the comeback on major hurricanes and named storms and things of that nature. If the MDR wakes up, I think you could salvage a lot of your ACE forecasts. I think ACE could push 100, 110, even that might be pushing it. I think the absolute max is probably 120 at this point. If the MDR wakes up, because you can get those long track systems that could produce more ACE in October. And I do generally think October will be more active. I think the question is where will it be more active, the Gulf or the MDR? And climatology starts to favor the Gulf in October, but that doesn't mean the MDR, can't produce in October. So that's it. First update in a while, but hope you enjoyed.